to Replayable, where we go into depth on our favorite tabletop games that keep us coming back again and again. I'm the start player Todd, and today I'm joined by Al and Dave. For our 37th episode, we will be discussing another modern classic set in space with Race for the Galaxy. It was designed by Thomas Lehmann with artwork by Martin Hoffman and Klaus Stefan. It was originally released by Rio Grande Games in 2007. You guys ready to blast off here?
I think I am, yes.
All right.
Well, I hope my signal stays good. I'm potting in from Ypsilon Eridani today, so quite a ways across the galaxy.
Yeah. So Race for the Galaxy is a card game where players build space civilizations. Each round, players choose an action, like exploring new cards, developing technologies, or settling planets. These action selections are revealed simultaneously. Actions are resolved for everyone, with a player or players who selected an action getting a bonus. The game ends when a player adds a 12th card to her tableau or when the pool of victory points is exhausted. The player with the most victory points wins. Look, we all select actions simultaneously, so we all get to go first. Let's all talk at the same time and see how that works out.
I really
what do you
like
think
this
about
Race for the Galaxy is one of my favorite games.
This is actually the first game Paul and I ever played together.
And scene. Well done, Al. This game has been a long-time favorite, and on BGG, it's ranked number 80 right now overall. Is it one of your top 4 or 5 space games? Does this even come to mind when you think about your favorite space games? Al?
Not really. We've got some pretty heavy hitters when it comes to space games. Obviously, the Terraforming Mars podcast shows how much I love that game. Twilight Imperium is the big bad in this game. Dune Imperium certainly is high up there as well. All 3 of these games are probably in my top 10 games overall. I don't think it really gets close to my top 5.
Okay. And Dave?
When I was going through the notes, I was pretty excited about this because I thought, oh, space games, I've got a ton of them. And then I looked at my shelves and I realized I don't have as many as I think. In fact, most of my favorites are from the last few years. So I was excited to get us together to see if we could come up with a Mount Rushmore, because I know Al is a big sci-fi fan and big on the space games. What are the contenders here for building a Mount Rushmore?
I think Al nailed a lot of them there. Yeah. So he had Twilight Imperium, and let's just go with 4 because that's the latest and greatest. He had Dune Imperium, so it's an Imperium thing.
Yeah.
And we're not including Rebel versus Imperium here. We're going to get to that in a bit. High Frontier and Terraforming Mars.
What about Space Hulk?
Not even close.
Okay.
I mean, I think we have to add Space Station's Phoenix from the other night to this list of growing fun games in space. In space.
Right?
100%. I mean, that's why I'm saying Beyond the Sun, Space Station Phoenix, those are, in the last few years. Right now, they're just some of my favorite games. They're on the hot list, but some of my favorite space games.
Right. And I think that's the point I wanted to make is like when I think about space games, Race for the Galaxy is not one of the ones that immediately jumps to mind. And yet it's a classic game that's still doing very well. And one of the things that I noticed about it when I was researching is if you look at Rio Grande Games, Ludography, they had built their brand around bringing English versions of other people's games to market. So if you look at companies like Amigo with Tichu or Cosmos, right? The Cosmos 2-player games, Lost Cities, Hans im Glück with El Grande. And suddenly out of nowhere, here comes Race for the Galaxy. That's their own IP for a change. I thought that was really interesting, and it kind of kickstarted and I don't mean to overuse that, but it got them going, I think, on a space theme that they have continued enjoying coming out with original games to this day. So what are your thoughts about that evolution of Rio Grande Games?
Yeah, now I feel like they're exclusively Dominion and then space and now trains, because they're doing the Winsome line as well.
Right.
I was keeping up for a while because they're relatively low cost. I absolutely love the Cube Rail games, and they're republishing all the old Winsome games. And, I bought one here and one there, and I think I'm just going to keep buying them. Well, now they're coming out with like 5 or 6 per year. I mean, it's the fire hose of these titles coming out. They've got like 10 more coming out. But yeah, I feel like there was definitely a shift where it moved from importing and translating or importing the translations of these games for us to when they got on the Dominion line and Race for the Galaxy, that really became the focus of what it seemed like they were doing. And just recently, it seems like they're starting to branch out again. And then we got Beyond the Sun, Underwater Cities, Space Station Phoenix. Those are all. And so RGG was right there in the beginning for me. And I love that they're still going strong and they're still some of my favorite games.
Right.
I mean, I think Dominion put them on the map. I mean, as far as a serious game producer, and then I think they just took off. They made some great decisions on the games they decided to publish, even though it wasn't their initial direction.
Right. Agreed.
Well, and Todd, we talked about the old RGG pamphlets.
Right.
I know you weren't here when I held it up, Al. I mean, obviously, this is great podcasting, but I'm holding up one of the pamphlets to my camera here. And every time you'd get a game, you'd get a catalog. And they weren't always all exactly the same, but you could kind of see what, Carcassonne, Tikal, Niagara. And I keep all of these and I would slip, usually that's part of the sprues that you just throw away, but I would keep them tucked under the insert. And because I just felt like I want all of these games. And I love this is like, it was still, we had BGG, we could look up the games, but this harkens back to being a kid and when you're flipping through a catalog and that's all you have.
Right.
Is a picture of the box cover and a short description. And it's always I enjoyed that. Like, ooh, a catalog, which there's nothing in there I haven't already seen, but I still get excited.
Especially a catalog from 2007.
Yeah, right. There are a few games in here that didn't really survive, like Boxcars. I don't know that game.
Okay.
I don't know. So anyways.
Let's quickly visit one of the companies that Rio Grande Games was bringing the English versions to was Ravensburger, and then their other imprint was Alea, right? And with Alea, we were getting the big box series. And it's funny, you watch a lot of YouTube content producers today, and somewhere on the shelves in the background, they've got the Alea big box series. You can recognize the colors and everything on there. And you get to number 7 and you get Puerto Rico. It's originally by Andreas Seyfarth. There is a really interesting genealogy. There's a thread on BGG where Thomas Lemon talks about how he came around to make Race for the Galaxy. And in part, it was looking at Puerto Rico and coming up with a card game version of it. And he had worked on a previous prototype of a collectible card game, never got published. And then he came up with the idea of multi-use cards. It was something that he talked about with Richard Borg over breakfast. And then he comes up with the idea of Race for the Galaxy. And you can see some of the same bones in Race for the Galaxy as Puerto Rico. And then independently, Andreas Seyfarth comes out with his own card game version of his game, and that was San Juan. And it has since spawned more games, right? Race for the Galaxy leads to Roll for the Galaxy, your favorite game, Dave, and then Jump Drive and then New Frontiers. It's a fascinating genealogy. Do you have thoughts about the evolution of the ideas from Puerto Rico / San Juan to Race for the Galaxy? Al? Puerto Rico is your favorite game.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No. Puerto Rico is actually the first game I think I've really, really disliked with a passion. I think I was at BGG Con when I literally saw a group of players flip a table. I've never seen that before. And it was over Puerto Rico. Apparently what had happened was the person picked a roll, and then the next person picked the wrong roll. And everybody was upset with him because you picked this, and then if this person picks this at this time, you have to pick that. And there's a whole cookbook of ways you're supposed to play. And this one player didn't play that way, and everybody was upset with him. And I don't understand why that much passion is in a game that's supposed to be fun. And I've never found Puerto Rico to be fun. So I know I probably get a lot of hate mail for this, but I think it's kind of like, one of those solved games. You do this, this, and this, and, maybe you win, maybe you don't.
Right.
And it answers a question that I had for you, Al. Because, I mean, your dislike of Puerto Rico is storied. It's in the annals of our game group legends.
Right. So now let's bring it back to Race for the Galaxy. How do you feel Thomas Lemon has improved upon that formula?
Well, I would say it's like the first 3 episodes of Star Wars. Puerto Rico doesn't exist for me. It all started with Race for the Galaxy. So I'm just going to go with Race for the Galaxy was the first game.
Okay. Well, that's one way to do it.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, does it solve the problems? I think so, because I don't feel that Race for the Galaxy is scripted. I feel like there are times when your move is obvious, but because of that aspect of maybe I want you to choose the thing that I want to do rather than me choose the thing that you want me to do, it's the simultaneous action. I think that's what solves it. If we're picking our roles in order, like San Juan and Puerto Rico, then it can be scripted. There can be some more obvious moves, but because now we have this cloud of war in some ways, like I don't know what you're going to do. I think I know what you're going to do. I know what I feel like you should do.
Exactly.
But really, ultimately, you're going to do whatever you're going to do, and I don't know what that is. I mean, still, we might get mad that, Al is exploring instead of, I thought you were going to produce. Al, what's wrong with you?
Well, I think for me, that's one of the things I love most about this game. It's the play the player aspect of the game as opposed to play the mechanics. It's like, I know what you know, and you know that I know, but I clearly can't choose the wine in front of me. So I really love that aspect because I don't know what you're going to do, but I think I know what you're going to do. So I'm gambling on it that I got to move this way.
Yes.
So that makes one of the perfect storms.
And at least once during every game, you're going to bet like, okay, I really hope Al settles. So I'm going to go ahead and explore. So I have some extra cards for it. And then you don't do what I expect you should have done. I think that's what solves that structured problem that can arise in Puerto Rico and San Juan is we're not all following. So we don't all get the same benefit. So it's not as apparent that there is one best action in this method. I think where people get upset in those other games is you can really allow someone to get off to an extraordinary start and the rest of the game is almost a foregone conclusion because you allowed them to snowball. And in here, it's a lot more opaque. You really don't know what people are going to pick. And not every role is going to get selected. And I think that's where this improves upon the action selection mechanism.
Yeah, experientially, in Puerto Rico or San Juan, if you don't pick what I think you should pick, I'm like, you're an idiot. In this game, if you don't pick what I want you to pick and I make a decision based on that, and when I see what you pick, I'm an idiot.
Right.
Exactly.
I should have known better. Like I realize I'm at fault for what you've just done.
Right. You should have hedged your bet and taken the thing you had to have versus hoping someone else was going to pick it for you.
Yeah, it was way too important to me. Why would I wait for you to do it?
Right.
And that's the game. Whichever of you just said it, that not cat and mouse, but that's the game.
But let's be honest. It really warms your heart when you make a play like that, and it turns out everyone picked exactly what you wanted them to pick, and you had the perfect round.
Oh, it's the best.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And I can settle and I can develop. Thanks, guys.
Exactly. Let's talk about the fact that there are two races going on in Race for the Galaxy. This should have been Races for the Galaxy. The two game ending conditions are someone places their 12th card in her tableau or the victory point pool gets exhausted. And the victory point pool came back from episodes 1 through 3, right? It never happened. It just magically showed up here. But how do you feel about that idea that someone could rush to like 9 buildings to generate a victory point generating machine, and now they're just feeding the machine while you're trying to settle and develop and get to 12?
I think it's important to have multiple races going on. Otherwise, if everyone's just trying to run towards the end, it gets kind of boring. I think that the strategy, whether or not you're looking at a development strategy or a military strategy or an engine strategy, that's what makes it so fun and unique is that everybody's doing their thing, and hopefully you're not butting heads and the pool runs out too quick, or someone gets to the end real quick because they're killing all the military planets. I think that's the breadth of the strategies at work there that makes a very positive game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's what makes it so interesting is how we start mostly on the same footing, but very quickly it's that path dependency that we're starting to move in different directions. And a big component of that is we want different tempos. So the person who's producing and shipping, they want to slow this game down so that they can run that engine that they've built, where the other person is just going to put their foot on the gas and let's get to 12 and end the game before you can get all those shipping VPs. And that's such a fine balance.
Right.
And trying to control that tempo. So when the other person keeps picking settle, keeps picking develop, like, no, we got to slow it down because I got more goods to ship. And that creates a great tension between the players.
I have more goods to consume.
Yes.
I agree. And in a way, it's somewhat frustrating because maybe I'm just a one-track person. I like the idea that we're all racing for the same thing, but someone's always going to be pushing that tempo. And the fact that someone can get out of one race and enter the other, so I can stop the race to 12 and now be trying to get more points through consume powers and production than you can get by settling or conquering or developing. It almost feels like, oh, okay, now there's one more thing for me to consider. And to start with, I didn't like it as much. I grew to like it more, and then I learned how to exploit it. But to start with, it was a jarring adjustment to make.
When you say adjustment, you mean because you are card-carrying San Juan fan.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
So you're talking about adjustment from San Juan.
Right. We're all in a race to 12, and now, actually, you can stop and win some other way.
That brings up the other aspect of the game, honestly, is that you mentioned is that pivot that, okay, I'm going down this path and it's not as successful for me, but I have to switch and go into trading now because I can't get my military engine going.
Yeah, I love that. It's, we're shipping or we're consuming and I'm like, great, I got 6 VP. And I look across the table, I'm like, oh, somebody else got 8 VP. Well, now maybe I can't just keep producing and shipping because they're outpacing me. Or you're building planets and I'm going to try to rush the end. And all of a sudden you get a good engine out in front of you. You're like, well, hold on a minute. Let's stop and smell the roses and let me run this engine for a bit. So you do change the tempo, as your tableau kind of comes together in front of you. So it makes it more of a dynamic game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is where we're talking about the comparisons to San Juan. I honestly think Race for the Galaxy is probably the better game, whatever better would mean.
Mm-hmm.
But San Juan is kind of out of my cold, dead hands kind of thing. I have such sentimental attachment to it. I absolutely love the game. And often when I'm in this situation where I love the simplicity of a game and I play another version of it or an expansion that adds a bunch of stuff to it, I'm usually bitter, get off my lawn old man about it. But for some reason in this case, I still love it. And there isn't too much going on here, but it's more than San Juan.
Absolutely.
It is more than San Juan.
So it's so funny that this is closer to Puerto Rico than San Juan is.
Yes, it is.
Though thematically, the art and everything makes you feel like San Juan is, obviously it was marketed as such. That's the card game version of Puerto Rico.
Correct.
But really, Race for the Galaxy is a closer comp. But like, Al was saying in the beginning, turning that to a simultaneous action selection, it's a totally different thing now. It improves it vastly.
Yes. And then it added a gazillion icons. So shall we talk about the learning curve that gets associated with this game? And is that reputation warranted? That it is difficult for beginners to learn this game because of the plethora of icons that are on the cards?
I'll take a shot at this. For preparation for this podcast, I taught my wife how to play Race for the Galaxy, mostly because I like to annoy her.
Do you want me to leave that in or do you want me to edit it?
Yeah, you can leave that in. Go ahead. In teaching her Race, I actually took a break and taught her how to play Roll for the Galaxy. So when I first taught her Race, she didn't get it. She didn't like it. She actually kind of threw cards at me. But then I taught her Roll for the Galaxy. And then after Roll for the Galaxy, we went back to Race for the Galaxy, and she got it instantly. It was, I think the learning curve on Race for the Galaxy is extreme. And I think one of the reasons I bring Roll to the Galaxy to the table more often is simply because I think it's more approachable. The iconography on Race for the Galaxy is out there. It's hard for beginners.
I played the game before I started reading the complaints about the iconography. Because it was a big thing. Anytime somebody would mention it, somebody would roll their eyes and go, I can't. There's too much. So I feel, and I've always felt the iconography is super intuitive, that I feel like I'm fluent in hieroglyphics when I'm reading it, that to me, it's super clear. Like this will produce a good on a, this kind of world, or, you consume it with this one. And I think it's super clear. In fact, I remember teaching Drew, our good friend, that we used to play with a lot, Drew, he was put off by the iconography, but he hadn't played the game yet. I'm like, no, you're a gamer. You'll be fine. And I taught it to him. And he like picked it up like that, like it was easy. So I don't know. I don't think it's a problem. And we've played games recently. In fact, the game we played last night, which will remain nameless, I would look at these icons. I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't even know what this means. Like there's so much and they're not as concise. They're not as clear. Does this mean I pick a guy up or does it mean I put a guy down or do I move the guy? Like I don't get it now. I have to look up the icons in the reference. And I guess people have to do that with Race for the Galaxy. But I just always thought it was clear. And I think it's daunting, but once you start to make sense of it, then it all flows.
Dave, this is a podcast about board games. You can talk about the game we played last night.
I don't like to disparage games.
Disparage away. I don't think we're going to play that one again anytime soon.
We are not playing that game anytime soon.
Was that Imperial Steam?
Yes, it was.
It was
Okay.
Imperial Steam. It was rules the game. It was just rules. I mean, more rules. And that means, I don't know.
I think the challenge with the iconography is that in order to understand the iconography, you have to understand the game. But in order to understand the game, you have to understand the iconography. So it's kind of it's almost a catch-22. So if you can kind of go through the game, get the game down pat prior to caring about the iconography becomes intuitive, like you were saying. But until you get that base understanding of the game, that's the challenge.
I think that's a great way to put it, Al.
Yeah.
I think part of it is it's pretty dense informationally because you have not just the worlds you can settle versus the worlds you can conquer. So you have the black outlines or the red outlines respectively, but then you have the types of worlds, right? So the background could be blue or tan or green or yellow. And you have to take that into consideration as well. And I think that's where they start feeling heavy when really there may not be that many icons to track and they make sense. But it's, I got to pay attention to the outline. I got to pay attention to the fill color. I got to pay attention to this one is a windfall world. So now it's just a halo, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's those things that make the icons difficult, not the icons themselves.
That's true. Well, what's amazing about it is it's almost, what do we call that? When language agnostic. It's almost, right. There's very little. I mean, there are some text on the cards, like the 6-point developments. There are sometimes you got to read a little text, but it's almost language independent.
Right.
Which is kind of interesting. This being, I mean, is this an early big deck energy game?
Well,
maybe the first, right? Because there are a few duplicate cards, but not many. I mean, there's just a ton of different cards. And with this glossary of icons, you can just pick up this new card you've never seen before and make sense of it. And there's no text on the card. So once it's flowing like that, like you said, Al, once you understand the game enough and what the icons are, they start to mesh together. And then you can just jump into a new card you've never seen before, and it makes perfect sense to you.
Yes. All right. One other thing I want to talk about is the strategies. I think there are at least 3, maybe 4 different ones that I can identify readily. And if we continue the comparison back to San Juan, back then you had the 3 6-point buildings, right? You were either going to go a guild hall strategy, you were going to go a city hall strategy and build violet buildings, or you were going to try to do the worst triumphal arch and get all the monuments. And I'd say that tongue in cheek because unfortunately the monuments aren't doing anything but giving you victory points. And at least with the guild hall and the city hall, the cards you're adding to your tableau are helping improve your engine. And within Race, we have settling, right? So you're going to be building out your tableau through settling, which means you're paying cards to place those planets. Conquering, which means you're built up your military strength and now you're able to place cards for free, or you're creating that consume production engine that's generating victory points because you're going to empty that. Maybe there's a 4th one. Can you get there from just developments? Are there any other main strategies that you could follow in this game?
Well, development is a strategy. The 6-point development cards can really make or break you as far as winning goes. And there's a couple of cards that say if you have development cards or settled planet cards that have explore symbols or stuff like that. So you can actually go through and win off more of a development strategy.
Okay. So there we have at least 4 paths to victory that you can follow. 4 different strategies.
I think of developing as more support for the other strategies. There's things on the support abilities of the developing. But like Al said, since there are some good 6-cost cards that reward or give you points based on your developments, I can't recall very often seeing somebody win based on just developing. obviously the things that the developments give you better settling powers or better consuming powers or better military powers and stuff like that. So it's kind of supporting those. But if you do get a ton of developments out there, there are cards that are going to turn those into points. But it's certainly not a strategy I ever set out to do. I mean, I guess you don't set out to do anything. You got to play the card you're dealt. But I can't really imagine just having a tableau of 12 developments.
Right.
Well, you have other cards that will support the development strategy, just like you would have development cards that support one of your other strategies.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, any of the strategies, you're going to be doing a little of the other things. It's not you just get on one path and go.
Right.
Sort of. I mean, if you're going military, you might not be consuming at all. The military is the one where you can just, I'm going for the alien worlds and all I'm doing is just kicking butt and taking names and I'm not doing anything else in this game.
Well, I'm exploring and settling, right?
Yes.
You start exploring so that I'm drawing 7 cards and taking 1. But if it's the right one, that's a big point value card with a high military value to conquer, and I have that in my tableau, that's the right one for me, right? Like you said, those alien world cards.
Right. And then you find cards that assist you in that, like keep an extra one or draw an extra one.
Yeah. But you can, at that point, almost ignore production and consuming. That's like the one strategy where you get to ignore everything else. But if you're trying to just settle worlds, you got to produce and consume a little bit because you got to feed that economy to keep settling those worlds, or the other way around. If for producing and consuming, you got to settle some worlds so you can produce more and consume more.
Correct.
True, but that's where those windfall worlds start kicking in because you can go ahead and get a free good on that, and then the person running the engine is going to run consume for you.
Yeah, right.
I think there is a greater flexibility of strategy and a greater number of strategies in Race for the Galaxy than there is in San Juan.
For sure.
Agree.
Makes it a deeper, more interesting game. Let's move on to the prompts. Weight and complexity on Board Game Geek's scale of 1 to 5, which aligns with Board Game Arena. How would you rate the weight of Race for the Galaxy? And Al, I'll let you take a first crack at this one.
I'm going to call it a medium. So right in the middle, 3. I think a lot of that is the learning curve. I would say all of that is the learning curve because that at its base, it's not a tough game. It's actually a fairly simple game that has some fun strategies, but the learning curve for people, newbies and people that, let's say, are coming back at it like we did last week,
Right?
it's definitely a medium.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what my thinking on it is. Maybe when you first pick the game up, it's a 4 for your first 10 plays, but then it's a 3 because once you're fluent in it. For me, it feels like a 3 because, I've been speaking the language for, would it come out in 07? Since the year it came out, I've been speaking this language. So to me, it doesn't feel like a heavy game, but I think I am taking understanding the hieroglyphics a little for granted.
Right.
Right.
Like familiarity brings a lot to your impression of this game. So I've played literally thousands of games of San Juan, hundreds of games of Race for the Galaxy. And so for me, I think of it as a 2, right? I get the game, but it's really a 3, I think, not just because of the iconography, but because once you get your head around how the game is played, it's understanding your opponent's position and having to reevaluate that. Like that's a requirement of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that adds that extra point of complexity to it that makes it an enjoyable and satisfying 3. So the strategy, and we already talked about what the strategies are. How would you rate on the same scale of 1 to 5 the opportunity for long-term planning? Dave?
I never know quite how to do this because we talked about the strategies, like you said, but it's super tactical. So trying to manage those those turn-by-turn decisions to kind of feed into your strategy and then knowing when to jump lanes to a different strategy. I think I might put it at a 4, but I think that's kind of overselling it a little bit. It's probably actually a 3. But I think when you're playing with fluent players, when everybody understands the game, I think the strategy, you got to have more of it and you got to be able to execute it with whatever the deck's throwing at you and, zig and zag with it. So I'm going to stick it at a 4, but I think I'm kind of going a little heavy.
Yeah, I had it as a 3. I hear what you're saying, but I think it is a card game. So you can't really expect to set your strategy and follow it for the entire game because you always like to say, you got to pay attention to what the game's telling you. And this game may tell you that, you're wanting to go with military isn't the path you should be taking. But what do you have, Al? You get to break the tie here.
I had a 3 as well. There's not a whole lot of long-term planning in this game. Actually, there's probably really no long-term planning in this game because you're doing what the cards that you get tell you that you're doing, plus what other people are doing kind of might change your strategy. So I think it's a 3. I think Dave said it best when he said it. It's very tactical. You're doing what you have and you're trying to make the best of it.
Yeah, I agree. So then luck. How much do you think luck plays a factor? Same scale, 1 to 5.
I'm going to go with a 3. I have a 3 here. While you get a lot of cards, and obviously cards are at the base luck, there's certainly a lot of that to it. You have a lot of ways to mitigate it. You can draw 7 cards in Explore versus drawing 2 cards or 3 cards if you pick that one. So I think there's some luck here, but it's really, you got a lot of choices that you can do with what you have. It's making the best move at a specific moment. So I don't think luck plays as big of a thing here as, like, say, something else like Settlers or something.
Right. How about Roll for the Galaxy?
I think Roll for the Galaxy is kind of the same, because you've got the ability to pick a slot with the pieces you don't have, and then you can also use the 2-for-1 switcheroony. So I don't think Roll has any more luck than Race does.
Interesting. Okay. Dave, how about the amount of luck in Race?
For the exact same reasons that Al just gave, I give it a 2. That because it gives you that explore action, which mitigates the luck. So you can't really blame the deck. I think if you feel like you didn't draw the right cards or you were unlucky, I don't think you were unlucky. I think you were just being stubborn because you got to see 7 cards, but you just didn't like those. You know, you didn't see what you could do with the best of those cards.
Right.
That I think in the end, it doesn't really depend on card draw. I mean, there are going to be games where just I drew everything and it was perfect. I never had to do the big explore action. You know, I always had the world I needed. I just kept drawing military and then kept drawing those alien worlds. I've had games where just I drew all those cards and just had an amazing game with no effort. So that does happen. But overall, I think it's don't be stubborn.
Right.
Play the cards that you dealt and you probably do better. So I'm going to keep it at a 2.
All right. Or you were greedy. So you took Explore, but you took the one that only let you see 3 cards because you wanted 2 cards.
That's right.
Yes.
Right. And for those reasons, I had it as a 3.
There's almost a floor on card games, right? Like a card game could never be a 1 because you're drawing cards. Like
Right.
A dice game could never be a 1. Even if you mitigate the heck out of it, you're still rolling dice.
Right. There's still an opportunity for someone to get a magic draw or a magic roll.
Mm-hmm.
All right, theme. I'm interested in this one. I was going to be boring, right, and say that this was a 3 because it's just cards and VP chips. But I actually like the artwork and it grew on me. So I'm going to go with 4 on this one. What did you guys have?
Well, it can't be any spacier. I mean, if you're not going to give it a 4, I mean, what else do you want? No. It's as spacey as you can get.
So did you give it a 5?
Logistics. I'm shipping and, you know, warehousing and all this stuff. I'm settling and conquering new worlds. But I will concede, though, it's generic space. Like if you look at the names of the cards, it's like Lost Colony, Research Station, Alien Tech. Like I don't feel that I'm inhabiting a built world.
Space Marines.
I feel like I'm in generic space.
Okay.
You know, you can't write the novelization of that. You can't, you know, you don't tell a narrative when we're done. Like, remember that world that I settled? Like, there's just no narrative there.
Right. Well, we might get to that here in a bit.
What's you're saying, Todd, about if a game doesn't have a narrative? Oh, it's about Bonanza where nobody says.
Oh, no, it's Agricola.
Oh, yes.
No one ever remember that game where I harvested a carrot?
Yeah. But, well, this kind of has that. You know, remember that one Race for the Galaxy where I, you know, sold a brown good?
Right.
There is a certain generic quality about it that kind of takes away from it.
Right.
Again, I'm doing logistics in space. What else do I want?
Hey, by the way, even though it didn't hit our Mount Rushmore, Space Hulk is great at that. My kids still talk about a game we played where like a lone space marine ended up gunning down 5 gene stealers because he rolled really well.
Yeah, right.
Al, what did you have for theme?
I had a 4/2. I think the theme is solid.
Wait, 4/2?
4/2.
What are we talking about here?
So your first few games, you're like, oh, look at this guy. He looks like Jar Jar Binks at the Imperial Council on Coruscant. And
Who are you talking about?
oh, he doesn't exist, right? But honestly, after your first, I don't know, 2-3 dozen games, it all becomes what can you do on this phase. So I think the theme is there for the first couple of times, and then after that, it kind of gets lost in the mechanics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I could go with that.
So a 4/2?
4/2, yeah.
You can tell Al's also a war gamer. I feel like he's just naturally gravitating toward that. All right, so what's your favorite player count? What is the game best played at, Al?
My favorite player count is actually 4. I think it's best played anywhere from 3 to 5, but I like a 4-player game. I think it has the right amount of tension trying to figure out who's going to do what, and you've got a lot of different options for your strategies.
Okay.
This one's a really hard one for me. I'm thinking 3. You know, at 2-player, you have to adjust the rules a little bit. You actually have more action selection cards, and you choose 2 each time. So you have more control over what actions are going to be selected because you're choosing 2 each time.
Right.
But it still has that little bit of that will they, won't they, I want you to choose this, are you going to? So it still has that, but I think a little bit of something is lost. At 4-player, I do like it at 4-player. That's why this is a tough one for me, because I like all player counts. But at 4-player, trying to track 3 other tableaus is less fun, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. I could talk myself into either way, because then there's more emerging alliances. Like you and I are the shipping guys, so let's maybe cooperate a little bit over here. Right now, I'm sticking at 3, but I don't know. I don't know.
I had it as 3 because I feel the more players you add, the more swingy the game can get depending on how well you anticipate what other people are going to do. And I like having some of that, but I don't want it to be too much lightning in a bottle. And I think 3 strikes the perfect balance of giving you some opportunities, but we're not going to select 4 different roles during this round. So then least favorite player count, and the game can still be good. So I'm not saying this is a bad edition of the game, but if you've talked yourself into 3, does that mean 4 is your least favorite or 2 is your least favorite, Dave?
4 is my least favorite because most of the actions are going to get selected. You do have a lot of those times where like, are they going to settle? So I'm not going to pick settle, but there's 3 other people. So maybe the person I thought was going to pick settle didn't, but look, this other person did. So
Right.
At 4 players, there's a pretty good chance that 4 of the 5 phases are going to come up. I mean,
Right.
Granted, there's a lot of crossover, so it's often 3. But at 3-player, sometimes you just get 2 phases happen.
Okay. And Al, what did you have for least favorite player count?
I have 2. I don't really enjoy the 2-player game as much as the 3 or 4-player game or 5-player game. I think that being able to choose 2 actions kind of takes the play the player part that I love so much out of the process, because I'll do one kind of, do I do this? Will he do this? You know, so on and so forth, but it doesn't have any real impact on the game for me. So 2, I think, is a lesser game in my opinion.
Right. I mean, if you want to look at you're running a consume and produce strategy, you can pick both of those actions in the 2-player game and guarantee they're going to happen in a round. Likewise, if you are settling, you can explore and settle and guarantee those 2 actions are going to happen in every round. So I agree. I think you either really like that and having that control, in which case 2 is probably your favorite. But if you like some of the wild card nature of trying to anticipate what someone else does, then 2 becomes your least favorite.
Yeah, it starts to feel like playing solitaire with another player at 2, I think.
Right.
I hear all that, but I played this probably mostly at 2.
Right.
And I really like it. It has that head-to-head where when it's just me and you, I know what you want to do. It has more of that wine in front of me than adding a 3rd player kind of adds a little more chaos to it. But when it's just 2,
Absolutely.
I know exactly what you want to do. And so now it's a little more of a chess match with how can I get away with this?
If you know what I'm going to do, but you know what you need to do, does what I need to do really matter to you?
Well, what I'm saying is I know what you want to do. And also, like you were saying earlier, like, I know what you want me to do. I don't know. That I think it gets, when 2-player, it gets a little more of that chess game of, well, I'm not going to pick this because I know you want to pick it. If you want this to happen, you got to pick it yourself. So I'm going to go off and do something else. And I don't know. I like the conflict between the 2-player game. I don't like it as much as the 3-player game.
Yeah.
And I totally hear what you guys are saying about the 2-player game. But, I mean, it's just maybe a notch below 3 and 4-player.
Nice.
But not much. I like it a lot.
Right.
That's fair.
I don't want to say that it's a bad game at 2.
It's not
It
a
is
bad game. It's not a bad game. That's why I said it's a lesser game, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's my least favorite way to play the game? Doesn't mean it's a bad game. All right. Actual playing time, because boxes can lie, and the box here says 30 to 60 minutes. Do we want to just go with the data on this one, or do you have impressions about it?
I mean, most games last 30 to 45 minutes for players that have played a lot. If you are playing with newer players or, let's say, rusty players,
Right.
it could be over an hour, but I don't really see it going too much further.
Right.
Yeah, I'd say 15 minutes per player. We'll see if the data proves that out.
Well, actually, that's exactly what they're saying, isn't it? Because on the original game, they're saying 2 to 4. So you just nailed it.
Yeah.
Our last game in person, 4-player, was 54 minutes. So we actually came in a little light. I've had 2-player games that took 40 minutes. So more than 15 minutes on that one. But digital games are a heck of a lot faster.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Well, 2-player games, you're doing 2 actions. So
Right.
it's almost like a 4-player game.
Oh, yeah. Good point. That's right.
I would say 40 to 60 is a reasonable approximation, and that's within range of the printed time on the box.
Well, 60 is a little high because we hadn't played in a while. We had a little bit of bumbling, and we still came in at 54. And
Right.
we, in general, I think are slow players. So
True.
if you're going the full hour and you're either learning the game or you're just sitting around BS and maybe too much.
So there was definitely some of that going on too.
There was
Yeah.
some of that going on.
But hey, that's gaming, man. Robin's racing. All right, expansions. There are a lot of them, and we're not going to cover them all. But do you have thoughts on a couple, or do you have a favorite? Or any of them must include? What do you think?
Gathering Storm adds the 5th player.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you have a 5th player, you have to have Gathering Storm. I think Brink of War adds a lot of AP, especially for those that are AP challenged.
Right.
So I would say that's probably a really good expansion, but can be really annoying if you have somebody who's too AP.
Mm-hmm.
Rebel versus Imperium, I think that the military strategy in the base game is a little tougher to pull off, but then you add military cards from Rebels versus Imperium, and I think it actually swings too far the other way.
Interesting.
So those are the 3 expansions that I've played quite a bit. The Redstone, the Arcs, I can't really talk to.
Right. Okay. Also worth noting that the Gathering Storm also adds support for solo play.
Right.
Yeah.
In my mind, if you were going to get one expansion, start with the Gathering Storm.
Agree.
Because it expands the range of players from 2 to 4 in the original to 1 to 5. And then it also gives you goals. We saw a watered down version of goals show up in San Juan 2nd edition when there was the Cathedral, which was always available as a 7-card building. And the first person to choose builder with 7 cards could take it. And I feel like goals are exactly that. Like they are known point scoring cards that everyone can aspire to, and the first one who gets there can take it. I think that's a great addition.
Yeah, I went the other way.
I'm going to say Gathering Storm, I mean, it does add a new least favorite player count because now you can play with 5.
Right.
But Gathering Storm has a really soft spot in my heart because that solo player, so this came out in 07. I had a child who was born in 07, and she had some pretty serious medical issues. So I spent a lot of overnights in the hospital up at UCLA, and I wasn't really allowed to sleep. I'd be there for 3-4 days, and I wasn't allowed to sleep because I had to stay awake to help her if she had events in the middle of the night. So I sat, in this tiny little table in the corner of a hospital room playing against that robot, Gathering Storm. I don't even know how many times, just over and over and over, trying to keep my mind off of, worrying about my kid and stuff like that. So it's funny. I probably, it's been so long. I don't know if I could sit down and play it right now without a, deep refresher, but I played that over and over and over. So, and that was the early days of solo gaming.
Right.
That, now every game comes with a automaton or automa, and you can have a one to 4 players. Everything's got that now. But back then, that was the only game I think on my shelf, other than just a deck of cards to play some, Klondike.
Right.
that was really nice to have back in 08, 09.
Right.
I love that. I love that story.
I do too.
Yeah.
I tell you what, though, I am looking forward to
Xeno Invasion.
the expansion that's coming out this year.
Xeno Invasion.
So Xeno Invasion was released in 2015. It's out. I've got a copy. Xeno Counter-Strike is supposed to be out, and it's supposed to finish that 3rd story arc. So one of the things you mentioned, Dave, is that there's not a lot of narrative in the base game, and that's true. They have since added story arcs through expansions that are bringing some of that narrative and campaign structure to it, which is an interesting way of expanding the Race for the Galaxy experience. So I'm actually looking forward to Xeno Counter-Strike because the game end conditions have changed, and so the game's going to get bigger. Like having tableaus of 15 plus cards are supposed to be common when played with that expansion.
I think one thing to accept with the later expansions, probably starting with, probably starting with Rebel versus Imperium on, is it starts to become less race for the galaxy and more struggle for the galaxy.
Right.
It's really not a race anymore. It's about running that engine. And especially there's ones where you can overtake other people's planets. And now that's
Sure.
that's getting into like the Citadel's Warlord, where you can kind of delay the game ending because I keep stealing your planets or something like that. And that's different than a race. And
True.
the name race in the title, I think, is I like the way that plays out in the game.
Yes.
It's something different when we're fighting each other and that. I'm not saying it's bad, but it starts to change what this game is for me.
Right. Now, it's worth mentioning that you can prevent someone from being able to take over your colonized worlds in your tableau if you don't play certain cards. But now you're limiting yourself to a subset and you're having to explore more to make sure that you don't play the ones that make you vulnerable. But I agree. Not my favorite aspect of an expansion.
I agree. Goals and takeovers were the two pieces that were added that I didn't really care that much for. I felt it fundamentally changed the game to a point that it wasn't the same game anymore.
Right.
Yeah,
So
100%.
those are house rule discussions, I think.
We'll get there.
Well, we see those goals in other games, like Cascadia had that expansion. It becomes a salad. There's more places to get points. Well, now if I'm not producing and whatever, and I'm not building worlds, well, now I could just go do something else. And then you get to the point where you're eking out 1 point over another. And we've talked about expansions that do this to games, and we generally don't like that sort of thing.
Correct.
Well, let's just jump to house rules then. This is almost a house rule, so...
No takeovers, no goals when you're playing with the expansions.
No take backsies? All right.
No take backsies. It doesn't feel like race anymore at that point.
Okay.
So the house rule is when you're playing with the expansions, don't play with the expansions.
Well, okay, so
I agree with it.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, when you're playing the base game, let's say you've played the base game, I don't know, 100 times or so.
Right.
Because you will. It's a fast game. You get to a point where, I get this starting card again. I get this starting card again. So you want to add a few extra cards to just add a little bit more variety from the way you start or the way the game progresses. Now I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do this. And so adding some extra cards actually kind of gives you that variety, but just adding a couple cards doesn't change the base game to something other than race. Adding takeovers or adding goals and stuff, like you said, it should be called Struggle for the Galaxy instead of Race for the Galaxy. And that's where I'm sitting with this. I think you can add a couple of very good cards to the mix and have an improved gaming experience without changing the base game, the fundamental game.
Nice.
Totally agree. A lot of the expansions and the BGG promos, they come with more homeworlds.
Right.
And so homeworlds, this is something that we see in all kinds of games now. We just played one last night. It's basically leaders, right? Where now we have asymmetric starting powers.
Right.
Maybe not starting powers because they don't give you game-breaking powers, but everybody gets a little bump start on getting
give you a little push
for their machine. Yeah. But when we're adding homeworlds, so one of the things about the base game, there's 5 of them. If we're playing 4 players, it's kind of dividing us into lanes, which is what we talk about with like Lost Ruins of Arnak or Beyond the Sun, where your player power is putting you into a lane that's kind of separating us a little bit, though we're still going to compete with each other. And some leaders' expansions are worse than others where we just get separated so much we're no longer competing with each other. But I haven't played with I have some of the expansion homeworlds shuffled in, but I do fear that if you get too many of those going, you can get to where like now we're all going for brown homeworlds or we're all going military or something like that. I think when we played the other night, 2 of you had military homeworlds.
Yeah.
So that set up a little bit of a competition between the 2, but still kept the lanes a little bit separate. Anyways, it's balanced with the 5 cards. As we add a bunch of new homeworlds, it could start to kind of get crazy with that a little bit.
Right.
You'd have to institute a draft or something like that rather than just you get what you get.
Right.
You get 2 homeworlds and you choose one versus
there you go.
Here's the one you get and you have to go with it.
Okay. Yeah. So it works. So I totally agree with Al. Adding homeworlds, adding cards, like that's fun. That's more content. Doesn't change the nature of the game. I'm super into it. But when we're adding sideboards and, player-to-player direct conflict, then it's a different game, and I'm not sure I'm as into it.
All right. So that's house rules. So most recognizable comparison, the highest ranking game that reminds you the most of this. And since we've already done an episode on San Juan, let's try to stay away from the family tree here. So please don't tell me it's like Roll for the Galaxy.
Well, this one was an interesting one for me because I picked 2, and one I thought was fairly popular, and one was fairly obscure. So I had them picked out, and then I went and looked up the ranking, and the one I thought was popular actually had less of a BGG score than the one I thought was obscure. So
That's funny.
It was hilarious. I'm like, oh, geez. So I put both of those in the less recognizable spot. So
Okay.
I'll kind of have two there since I've already picked them.
Sure.
But for most recognizable comparison, a game I've already mentioned a couple times already is Twilight Imperium. I think the role aspect and the follow aspect of Twilight Imperium, just makes this game very recognizable. I'm going to do this. I get this strategy. Oh, geez, you took the role I wanted ahead of me. Or I'm not going to pick this because I want you to pick it, so I can do the follow at a cheaper amount.
Right.
So I don't know. Twilight Imperium is a very high-rated game. It's a game that I think most of us love. We don't get to the table anywhere near as often as we should,
Right.
but it's a great game in comparison for me.
That's solid. Like spending that command point, right, to be able to follow your selection.
Right?
And then like, oh, I'm not going to have it for when Paul picks technology or whatever it is.
Oh, jeez. You had to bring that up.
I did. Dave, what did you have?
Well, I'm not going to go too far afield. I'm going to get outside of the family tree, but not outside of the designer.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Res Arcana, which is
Okay.
an old
Nice.
layman game. They're not really multi-use cards, but you can exchange in some of your cards for, I don't know, gems or magic or whatever, elements, and then use those elements for other things. But so you are making that decision on, do I build this card or do I spend this card?
Right.
So that's close. But really, Res Arcana is the consume action in one game, because it's that cube exchange where the whole game is trying to produce your goods and then consume those goods. And it also has that element, once my engine's set up, I'm going to put my foot on the gas and I'm going to produce and consume as quickly as I can to outpace you. So
Right.
it definitely has that Tom Lehman feel. Once you know it's the same designer, you're like, that makes perfect sense. But it is a different enough game
Right.
where it doesn't feel iterative. We played New Frontiers. I'm like, oh, why would I ever play this over Race for the Galaxy
Right.
or Roll for the Galaxy? It's the same game, but a little different. So Tom Lehman, I think I love his designs. He's always, when he's got something new coming out, always look at it. By the way, when are we getting Dice Realms to the table?
Right.
But he does start to feel iterative where, oh, this is a new take on the same thing.
Yeah. By the way, Dice Realms, just add it to the board. Let's vote it up. We'll make it happen.
Yeah,
Especially now that we've cleared Imperial Steam
forever.
forever. Yeah.
I'm glad I wasn't there.
You dodged a bullet on it. But, I don't want to disparage it too much. It might be a great game, but there was something about it that it's not for me. So
Yeah.
Just to say something about your pick there, Dave. When we were preparing for this, I mentioned on Slack that this game, maybe I should pick this game. And then I looked up, like, of course, it's from Thomas Lehman.
I'll say that Thomas Lehman actually has a pretty broad range of game types because he also did 1846, right?
Yeah,
That's his game. If you want to talk about races, let's race to the Midwest.
that's true. If I'm going to say his games start to be iterative, I mean, the Kinesia exists as well, right? Kinesia will do 4 takes on the exact same game. And,
Right.
and Layman 2 has broad enough to where you can't just say he's constantly doing the same thing over and over.
Right.
But there are other things out there. So, I mean,
Well,
like I said,
1846 is actually a very approachable 18xx game. I think that
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe one of the most approachable of the 18xx games.
well,
Yeah.
and we're still waiting for the follow-up, which he's had in the hopper for like 15 years.
Forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. 1833 NE.
I also have 2038, an 18xx game by him, which is 18xx in space.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So for most recognizable, I am focusing on arguably my most favorite mechanism in a game, and that's multi-use cards. When we did the San Juan pod, I had picked Glory to Rome because it's a very easy comparison with rolls and following. And
I see that.
so for this one, I went with Forced Shuffle, another game we've already done a pod on. But same thing, the idea that I've got all these cards in my hand and I got to choose which ones do I want to play and which ones do I have to sacrifice as payment to play them. And I really like that agonizing decision.
That's your most recognizable?
Yes.
Okay.
So now less recognizable. What did you have for that? What's perhaps a more obscure game, but for Al, it's reversed. That reminds you of Race for the Galaxy. And Al, go ahead. Tell us both of them.
For the game that I thought was actually a lot more popular than it was, I had Imminent Domain.
Okay.
It's a space game. It's got survey, warfare, colonize, produce, trade, research. It's got the roles, and you kind of pick the roles you want to do, and you can either use them as a role or use them as an action. It's actually a pretty fun game. And I thought it's a Seth Jaffe game.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was actually fairly popular. I know it's been popular with me and Paul and a couple other people.
Mm-hmm.
But when looking on it, it's like number 834. So that was my one that I thought was more popular. The one that I thought was actually a lot more obscure and highly underrated is a little game called Oh My Goods. It's an Alexander Pfister game.
Mm-hmm.
I think it suffered because the first edition came out and it had some rules. It didn't have some rules in it that it needed to fix it. It probably was released too soon. But when the second edition came out, I thought the game actually fixed almost everything that was wrong with it. And it uses the same cards. You can use the cards for products or completing goods or stuff like that. I thought it was an amazing game, and I think it's rather underrated. It's an engine builder. You get to run your engine at the end, which you couldn't do in first edition. So that was the two. I thought Oh My Goods was obscure and Imminent Domain was popular, but Oh My Goods is actually 771.
It's a great pick.
It is a great pick. That was my pick for less recognizable on the San Juan pod, so I totally agree with you. Yeah, great pick. Dave, what did you have?
Well, I'm punting a little bit because I'm going to use the same thing I said for San Juan because, the shoe
All
fits. What I want to say is Citadels.
Okay.
But Citadels is actually ranked higher, but it's not good enough to be my number one pick. So if I want to go to a less recognizable. So I'm going to go again, Mission Red Planet.
Okay.
Which Citadels and Mission Red Planet, they're role selection games. And Mission Red Planet is Citadels plus El Grande because you're selecting roles, using those roles to launch rockets to Mars and set up colonies and, to have some area control up on the map.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that comes Citadels. Citadels might be older actually, but I feel like Citadels comes from this same lineage, or it's in the vein of Puerto Rico, San Juan and that, but I'd have to look at that. Citadels might actually be older.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. But Mission Red Planet, we really need to play that. It's been a while.
Yeah, we need to play it.
So again, avoiding Oh My Goods, I went with a game that if you imagine you took Race for the Galaxy and you added an auction instead of an exploration, it's a theme out of the Deadliest Catch, and you have Fleet.
Huh.
And now we're doing an auction for fishing licenses that can be paid for using the value of boat cards. So you've got that multi-use card thing going again. And, you're then trying to see if you can bring in the largest value catch. And I've pimped my copy out with crab meeples that I picked up at BGG Con. So let's play some Fleet.
Nice. Hey, well, I'll throw in a point of correction. Citadels predates Puerto Rico by 2 years.
Wow.
So maybe we have not been giving credit where it's due. I mean, Citadels walked so these games could run, I guess. I mean, I wonder if Citadels inspired Puerto Rico at all.
With the rolls.
Yeah, I don't know. Good research for the Puerto Rico pod that will never happen.
Yeah.
Maybe
Or the Citadels pod that will never happen. It's such a great game with a fatal flaw. Like right in the middle of that game, it just hits this drag, and it's so miserable.
Right. Well, never say never. We'll see.
Yeah.
Well, it's fun when it's new and you don't hit that snag. Once you know about the snag, it gets old.
Yeah. The half an hour game turns into 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Beating up on the leader until everyone is in contention, which it's outstayed its welcome by the time you finally mercifully end the game. All right. So Al, one thing that I wanted to add, you mentioned Eminent Domain.
I did.
And I think one of the reasons why it's more obscure than you thought was because it's been out of print for a long time, right? It was a Tasty Minstrel Games title, and they have closed up shop. It's going to be getting a reprint from Rio Grande Games. It's coming out next year.
Look at that.
I mean, I've got a lot of the expansions too. So I thought it was a fine game. It had a lot of great things going for it.
I agree. All right. So if Race for the Galaxy is being played at game night, what do you want to play afterwards? And if you consider this to be a lighter game, then you could choose one that precedes it. What did you have for the best double feature game to go with Race? Al?
I kind of like what we did last week with Space Station Phoenix. I thought that was a good follow-on game. If we're going for a theme, I would go with Terraforming Mars. I think the similarities with Terraforming Mars is good because you have to be so efficient in buying your cards, paying for the cards, and then putting them into your tableau. Whereas in Race for the Galaxy, you also have to decide what you're going to do and use the rest of the cards to pay for it. So, it's either between Space Station Phoenix or Terraforming Mars for me.
Okay. Great choices both.
Keep it space. I'll go Space Station Phoenix was an option for me. I'll go Beyond the Sun. Let's keep it space and you can keep going with that.
And you guys are going even further because you're keeping it space and keeping it Rio Grande.
That's right.
You've got the start of the Rio Grande Space Surge and the 2 games at the end of it, not including Evacuation or there's no one's coming out. I went with a lighter game. So if I thought science fiction in space, lighter weight, I'm going to roll some dice and I'll go with Space Base. Because one of the things that you do there is the active player gets to roll the dice, and then there is a passive player action where we get to follow to a lesser extent. It'll be over fast.
Yeah, mercifully. I'm not enjoying Space Base. I'd rather play Verful Bonanza.
Well, that's a great game. I like that one.
Al saying Terraforming Mars here makes me wonder. So did Race for the Galaxy, is this the proto, I mentioned it earlier, the big deck energy game, but really does Wingspan, Arc Nova, Terraforming Mars, do they come from in some way Race for the Galaxy? I hadn't really put that together, but because that large deck of single cards, there are some duplicates in Race for the Galaxy, but we're seeing a ton of those games now, and we're really enjoying them.
Right.
But without Race for the Galaxy, do those happen? Do we get Wingspan if we never had Race for the Galaxy? And I hadn't really put it together when I was choosing my recognizable comparisons, but Wingspan's not that far afield.
Well, you've got that Terraforming Mars Tragedy card game, Ares game.
Ares Expedition.
Yeah.
Terraforming Mars, but worse.
Yeah, much, much worse.
Do you like Terraforming Mars? Do you wish it were worse? Play this.
Yikes.
Yeah, I don't like to bash on a game too much, but Ares was Race for the Galaxy with Terraforming Mars theme, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah. I had forgotten about that one, but yeah, it was supposed to be the card game version of Terraforming Mars, but it took just as long, maybe longer. And it wasn't better than Race, and it wasn't better than Terraforming.
We tried it one time, though.
Yeah,
I've played it a couple times.
It was one too many.
Because I own it. I tried it a few times. It was the fact you forgot about it is we call that repression.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So now I've trashed on 2 games tonight, and I try not to trash on games.
You know what? One of the things that is great about the format of our show here is these are just our opinions, right? You can watch any number of videos or listen to podcasts that tell you how to play this or do an unboxing that. No, this is the raw stuff of people that play the game and letting you know what they think about them. So let it roll, baby. Let it roll.
Yeah.
What feature of Race for the Galaxy now stands out to you? What has aged the best about this game? What do you think, Dave?
Well, it's part of the multi-use cards things, but it's cutting your darlings. It's that decision of, I really want to play this card, but I need to use this card.
Right.
So I have to decide, I got to make Sophie's choice between these 2 cards.
Okay. All right. I totally 100% agree. I had multi-use cards down for it. And an honorable mention to the way that Conquest was implemented, in that you could build up your military strength and then place planets for free, as opposed to always having to spend cards to colonize. But yeah it's that multi-use card thing. I just absolutely adore it. Al, what'd you have?
I had the same thing. When it first came out, using the cards for everything, I mean, my mind was blown. That was such an amazing mechanic, but I think that I could never say it as good as Dave just said it. So,
all right. Excellent. Dave, you're so well-spoken.
Thanks.
So what feature of the game now disappoints? What hasn't aged as well? And, it's been aging since 2007, so it's a fine wine.
Yeah, I'm kind of reaching on this one because I don't have much complaints about this, but I would say the multiple cogs, the idea that there can be a lot to keep track of when your tableau grows. You've got, oh yeah, I got to get a card for this, and I get a discount here. Don't forget that. And oh yeah, I can do this. But again, that's just because we had to make a choice for this category. I really have no complaints. It's manageable.
Right. Al, did you have any?
I got nothing.
You got nothing.
I got nothing. I looked at this game. I played it. I've got the iPad app.
Mm-hmm.
I've probably played it 100 times since last week. There's zero about this game that's wasted or hasn't aged. It's a solid game today.
Right.
If anything, I would say the base game gets old because you're playing the same starting worlds over and over and over again. And we've hit that earlier.
Right. Solid.
That's a great complaint to have about a game, is that after 100 plays, I would like a little variety.
Right. How many games never get there, right?
Right.
I would say mechanically, I'm not thrilled with the victory point condition, right? The fact that victory point pool exhausts is an ending condition of the game. Side note, that got tweaked in Jump Drive. So in Jump Drive, you're looking to see if someone gets to 50 points to trigger the end of the game, but there are an infinite number of, well, they're not infinite. There are sufficient point chips for everybody to get close and then exceed on that last turn. If I had to nitpick, I'd probably say I'm not a fan of victory point pool exhaustion being a game end trigger. The other one that kind of chafes on me, and it's more of I have to readjust my understanding of the game, is the idea that if I pick trade, I can trade it for multiple cards, but if I pick consume, it's only worth 1 point. Like, that's straight out of Puerto Rico. But like, I really enjoy how in Roll for the Galaxy, if I have placed a die of a matching color on the world, then when I consume it, it's worth an additional point that way. I know I can tweak consumption powers through development and whatnot, so all of the objections I can come up with Race for the Galaxy, there are actually ways to mitigate it during the course of the game based on the cards I select.
But there are some cards out there that like will make a yellow worth 2 points, or you can trade 2 goods for 3 goods based on your tableau. So
right, that's what I'm saying. Like the nitpicks I have there.
Yeah, it's tough to find a nitpick on this game.
Right. So did this game replace a previous one? I just said no.
Well, Puerto Rico. I mean, that's what we've been saying the whole time. I mean, I don't think I've played Puerto Rico 2-3 times since this came out in 2007.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm with Dave. I mean, there's no reason to put Puerto Rico on the table anymore.
That's been true since San Juan.
Yeah, well, that's valid. But they've got a new Puerto Rico coming out, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I thought it came out. Is there still one coming out? It's the
special edition.
Its crowdfunding campaign is currently underway.
Oh.
Yeah.
So has this game been replaced? And if so, by what?
I'm looking forward to hear what you guys have to say, because I do not have an answer here.
I'm always into Terraforming Mars, so I think I'd rather play Terraforming Mars over Race for the Galaxy. Unless I have 45 minutes, then Race for the Galaxy is fine. But I also say that Roll for the Galaxy is, I think, every bit as fun as Race for the Galaxy, and I think it's more approachable for newer players.
Right? Yeah. I will take the other one you didn't say, Al. I had Terraforming Mars, but I also had Dune Imperium. I would play Dune Imperium over Race for the Galaxy every day of the week and twice on Sunday. But the time investment is legit. And returning to Race for this pod has really been enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to exploring Xeno Counter-Strike. So there's going to be a raceissance here coming up.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, we didn't really mention it in expansions, but you can now buy the expansions in like big boxes. You can get one box that has the first 4 or something like that.
Right.
So it's not quite a lifestyle game, but it's getting close, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the tough things about all the expansions is if you are only going to play a few games, it's easy to get into all these expansions. But if you're a cultist of the new, or you like to, you only get to play once a week, it's really tough to get so many different iterations of the same game to the table.
Right. Agreed. All right. You've heard our answers. What do you have, Dave?
I'll go with Terraforming Mars. I like it.
Okay.
No, I think Al's right. It scratches that itch. I mean, they're very different games, but at the same time, they use tags and iconography, and we're in space. So I guess so. I mean, we certainly over the past few years, I play Terraforming Mars more than I play Race for the Galaxy.
Right.
And the theme stays with you. The cards you play keep you in the theme the entire game.
Yeah, the theme is much better implemented in Terraforming Mars, where you got a certain kind of plant, or you've got a certain type of machine, and it's you're inhabiting a world in a way. Like I said, Race for the Galaxy is you're just inhabiting generic space.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a good observation. I like it. Soundtrack. What music would you want to listen to while playing Race for the Galaxy or Terraforming Mars or So Dave?
Well, we have a perfect answer to this because we did. When we played the other night, we had on some Vangelis, right?
We had a couple. And so, yes, we did tap into the Blade Runner soundtrack.
Yeah.
We started with the Stellaris soundtrack from the video game
Right.
on Paul's recommendation. That was a good one.
So yeah, that's like space synth, anything in the space synth genre. I'm happy with just, the sci-fi noises and stuff going on in the background. It sounds great to me. But to pick something specific, I'll say the Blade Runner soundtrack.
Okay. Al, did you have a pick for soundtrack?
You know what? I went custom here.
Let's hear it.
For me, Race for the Galaxy is a race. And it really feels like a race. You get halfway through Race for the Galaxy and you know it's a race. You didn't realize that at first, but you know it. So I went through some songs and I wanted like a medium tempo songs that kind of picked up a little bit. I've got Radar Love by Golden Earring, Running an Empty, Jackson Brown, Danger Zone, Kenny Loggins. I guess you can throw Footloose in there. Running Down a Dream, Tom Petty, Bad Moon Rising, CCR. I even threw some Lose Yourself from Eminem in there.
Oh my gosh. I have to follow this.
Paint It Black, Rolling Stones. I guess you can throw Start Me Up there. And obviously you can, the boss has Born to Run. So I got, but if you listen to the song, especially like Golden Earring, where it's it's like,
right.
it makes you want to move. It makes you want to race, but it's not too fast to be overbearing, but you're like, okay, Kenny Loggins kicks in the Danger Zone. You're like, oh yeah, I'm in the Danger Zone.
Right.
So
that's hilarious. I literally had that Golden Earring song stuck in my head a few days ago. I was walking around singing Twilight Zone and I hadn't heard that song in I don't even know how many years.
Wow.
So build that playlist and we can listen to it.
Okay.
Well, we'll do.
Oh man. All right.
What about you?
I had do whatever. I went with the Endless Space 2 soundtrack, which is a video game and it's on Spotify and it's all spacey great. Okay. So rating on Board Game Geek scale of 1 to 10 now. How would you rate Race for the Galaxy? Al?
I've had it at 7 for at least a dozen years.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good. I was always willing to play it, but it wasn't something I would be pushing to get on the board. I'm probably going to have to reevaluate that because after this, would you call it a race-assance or?
Yes.
I think I'm back in it. I think there's even more to explore here. So I might have to reevaluate that. But for now, it's 7.
Okay. So I had it as an 8. When I originally rated it way back when, I had it as an 8, and it's still there. I think it could be higher if it was in regular rotation. I mean, I don't think it would ever be higher than a 9, but for me, it's still an 8.
Yeah.
And I still prefer the more streamlined, faster play, one-dimensional race that is San Juan. But this has been a great return to a game that I had forgotten about. Dave, what'd you have?
I have it as a 9. And it gets the frequent flyer bump. So it probably more like a 7 or 8. But I can't play a game 200 times in the last 20 years and not give it a few extra bumps. I can't play a game this much and say it's a 7. Like I've played it so much. I mean, to look at my rankings, I have Turn in Taxis ranked as a 10. Like is Turn in Taxis a 10 game? No. But I've played it probably 300 times. Like it gets that extra bump. Like there's
Valid.
Even if I can't articulate it, if I played it that much, there's something I love about it. So I'm giving it a 9. No complaints.
All right. And we did it again. We got ascending order on the ratings. It's like this pseudo game I'm starting to play here where I try to call it and see if we can get it in lowest to highest rating. So we end on a high note. So is it replayable and how soon would you want to revisit the game? I'll say absolutely replayable. I mean, I could probably play this every month in person. I wouldn't want to play it every week. But I could play it a couple of times a week or more digitally. That's been a blast. What did you have, Al?
I say it's actually very replayable. As the Race-assance starts, I think I'm going to go back through some of the initial expansions and try to build a balanced deck. See if we can get like a balance where we don't go too far towards the military or too far towards some of the engine building stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I could do that, but I thought it would be a fun project.
Okay. And Dave?
Yeah, It's absolutely replayable. I mean, we're still playing it after all these years. You know, it's a game that over the past few years, it would be on the shelf. And I would think, I don't know why we don't play it more. It plays quickly. We're always in that, like, look, we got about an hour left. What should we play? And we look at my shelf and we're like, I don't know. How about this? Like, Race fits that perfectly. Everybody knows it. You go around the table and like, do you like Race? Yeah. Do you like it? Yeah. Do you like it? Yeah. Do you want to play it? Nah, let's play something else. Like, for some reason, we just weren't bringing it out.
Right.
So I'm happy to hear about the Race-assance. I'm ready for it. So
Yeah. Well, we did that for Tigris and Euphrates too. Everyone loved Tigris and Euphrates, and we just never got it on the table.
that's right. Yeah.
And then
So
we did a pod. It was our very first episode, so we played it a few times to get ready, and then we put it back on the shelf.
Yeah, I love this game, but I've never played it.
All right. And with that, we are exhausted. I mean, the victory point pool is exhausted. For our next episode, things will be getting a little spookier around here.
Ooh, I'm having visions.
Hey, you can't talk. All right, guys. Thanks for being available for this. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good one.
Thank you for listening to Replayable. Support for our podcast comes from listeners like you. You can find us online at replayable.fm, on Twitter as ReplayableFM, and on Instagram as ReplayableFM. You can also join our team at patreon.com/replayable. Thank you for your support. We welcome your feedback, which is the only way that we are going to get better. You can get in touch with us via email at feedback@replayable.fm. And if you're interested in sponsoring us, then please contact us at sponsors@replayable.fm.